There is an old saying that getting there is half the fun. This is especially true of travel across the vast, varied, and beautiful reaches of the Canadian landscape. But when fate intervenes, travel can quickly turn from fun to deadly. February 7th, 1986, 12:45 p.m. In Vancouver, the Supercontinental pulls out of Canadian National Railway's Station Street Terminal. The passenger train is on its scheduled Trans-Canada run to Toronto and Montreal. 2 diesel locomotives pull a baggage car, a day coach, a dining and observation car, and 2 sleepers. Most passengers on board would agree that this is the safest way to travel, free from the hazards often found in the air or on the highway. One of them is 62-year-old Ken Cuttle, who is on his way to Edmonton to see about a new job. Ken enjoys the camaraderie he finds on board the Supercontinental.
We were in the dome car. That was a good place to meet up with people because you were up in the air and you were able to observe all the countryside. You know, you were in a good position to look around.
One passenger he meets is 64-year-old Martin Peterson. Martin is on his way home after attending a convention in Victoria.
He'd asked his secretary to book a flight, and he was so horrified at the price of the return ticket. He said, well, that's ridiculous. Find out how much it cost me to go on the train. So she did, and it was about half. So he said, book me on the train.
'78-year-old retired school teacher Zora Olson and her 80-year-old sister Isabel Ross have been visiting relatives on the West Coast. It's a tour that has involved travel by plane, bus, car, and boat.
When we got to Kamloops and went to the station and inquired when the train was coming, we decided we'd take it. But we hadn't planned on it at all. We just thought it would be a nice change.
For most of the passengers on board, it is a nice change, and a relaxing one too. Saturday, February 8th, 1986, 1:55 in the morning. In Edmonton, Alberta, 400 kilometers east of the Supercontinental, train number 413 gets the green signal to pull out. Stretching almost 2 kilometers from head to tail, the monster freight carries 114 cars and weighs over 12,000 tons.
This particular freight consisted of 3 locomotives, a high-speed spreader, 34 hopper cars carrying grain, 7 flat cars, another roughly 40 open-top hopper cars carrying sulfur, 11 cars carrying caustic soda, another 6 cars carrying ethylene dichloride, then about 5 more hopper cars carrying grain, and finally a caboose. Just try to stop that on a dime.
By dawn Saturday, the first crew has taken the freight to Edson, 200 kilometers west of Edmonton. There, the second crew prepares to take over. As the huge freight eases into Edson Yard, it slows down just enough to allow engineer Jack Hudson time to climb aboard and take controls of the lead locomotive. Trainman Mark Edwards jumps into the second diesel as it moves past. Conductor Wayne Smith waits 20 minutes for the rest of the train to pass before he climbs into the caboose. Eager to get back to their hometown of Jasper, the 3 men have volunteered for duty after little more than 4 hours sleep.
The evidence was that the freight crew had been not taking as much rest as they could have or should have, not just in the immediate period before this particular accident, but in the long haul, over weeks.
As freight number 413 pulls out of Edson, Via Rail's Supercontinental is in Jasper, about 170 kilometers to the west. It has stopped to pick up a smaller passenger train consisting of a diesel unit and 2 more sleeper cars.
It arrived at Jasper at 6:30 in the morning, so I thought, oh, I'll be up early and I'll get a walk out in the fresh mountain air, which I did. I think we stopped in Jasper something like an hour, maybe.
At 7:15, the Supercontinental pulls out of Jasper Station, heading east towards Edmonton. Engineer Mike Palashatti is at the controls. The passenger train is running 10 minutes late and has to pick up some time. The first town between here and Edmonton is Hinton, just 83 kilometers away. Freight number 413 is also headed toward Hinton, a familiar stretch of track for engineer Jack Hudson. But Hudson is tired. In the past 30 days, he has only had 4 days off. By 8:20 a.m., Freight 413 pushes onto the northern section of a 16-kilometer stretch of double track. At the same time, the Supercontinental pulls out of Hinton Station. Passengers Martin Peterson, Zora Olson, and her sister Isabel Ross are in the dining car, having breakfast.
We just got up. We'd been there all night on the train, Kamloops. We were both sitting quite happy and talking to some of the passengers and everybody enjoying the trip.
Ken Cuttle and fellow Britisher Stephen Day decide to move up to the dome car to enjoy a bird's-eye view of Canada's famous Rocky Mountains.
It's all glass, and of course you're 16 feet in the air, and you get a good view of all the surrounding countryside.
As the Supercontinental moves away from Hinton Station, the engineers pass a set of signals telling them to proceed around the turn and onto double track just a few kilometers ahead.
There are sections where there's a single track, so that has to be shared by trains going in opposite directions, and that is controlled by the dispatchers and by the signals. So they hold trains until the other train is passed, and then the train moving in the opposite direction can then use the single track.
4 kilometers before the switch, the freight passes an amber approach signal, warning it to slow down and prepare to stop. Instead, it continues to pick up speed, traveling almost twice as fast as it should.
The recommended track speed, even at the best of time, was 50 miles per hour. The evidence was that the train was doing about 58 miles per hour, that it had in fact been accelerating over the previous mile or two.
Several times, conductor Wayne Smith radios the head-end crew to confirm the approach signal, but there is no response. According to regulations, he should pull the emergency brake, but he does not. As it approaches the end of the double track, CN Freight 413 is a disaster waiting to happen. Saturday, February 8th, 1986, 8:40 a.m. Canada's premier passenger train, the Supercontinental, has just left Hinton Station, 83 kilometers from Jasper, Alberta. Signal lights give it right-of-way over any westbound traffic and instruct it to proceed onto double track, where a switch will allow it to pass through on the south section. In the observation dining car, Martin Peterson has just been served breakfast. Across the aisle, Zora Olson and her sister Isabel Ross are recalling the highlights of their West Coast holiday. Upstairs in the observation dome, Ken Cuttle enjoys the dawning of a new day with a fellow passenger.
I was talking to Steve Day about, you know, the landscape, what we were looking at, and I saw the light.
The lights belong to CN number 413, an enormous freight train of 3 locomotives and 114 cars, now hurtling along the double track toward the passenger train.
What should have happened is that the freight train should have slowed down and come to a stop before going out onto the piece of single track to allow the passenger train to go by first.
Instead, number 413 races past the triple red stop signal and hits the junction of double and single track with no sign of slowing down. The impact trips the switch, pitching the giant freight onto the single track as it rounds the curve. From the moment of sighting, there is just 19 seconds between the two trains. The Supercontinental travels at 74 kilometers an hour. The freight, an astounding 94.
You can conclude from that Hudson did not at any point apply the brakes. But by the same token, the crew of a passenger train did not apply their brakes. They were probably just frozen with shock to discover this big freight bearing down on them.
I saw both trains going up like that, you know, the diesel, and then bursting asunder, and then that was it. I was picked up and thrown the length of the carriage, and somebody landed on top of it.
Multiple massive forces banging into each other. The hills and the valleys literally ringing with this metallic clang.
There were steel pipes 30 foot long and 4 foot in diameter being thrown like straws. Hundreds of yards, there was grain cars going through the air. I mean, the whole car.
The sheer weight of the 413 stops the Supercontinental cold, but the three freight locomotives hurl forward. They climb up over the passenger engine, the baggage car, and the day coach, cracking them like eggs, then crushing them like aluminum cans.
You've got the roar, you've got the fire, and then the screaming begins.
The sound was horrendous. I mean, you couldn't describe it.
From the dome of the observation coach, Ken Cuttle sees a soaring grain car headed straight for them. The front of the dome pitches to the left just as the grain car flies by on the right, hitting the rear of the coach instead.
If we'd not gone off like that, it would have come through the roof where we were, but with us going like that, it sheared the bottom half of the dome car. Sheared it away, cut it off completely.
As the dome car tips on its side, the impact tosses Martin Peterson in the air like a rag doll.
He was tossed toward the back against the bulkhead. And because of the impact, the window shattered. It blew in his face. And so he was covered with tiny, tiny pieces of glass. He jumped out of the window that had shattered, and he jumped out onto the track.
In the observation dome, Ken Cuttle and his fellow passengers are also threatened by encroaching flames.
And then I noticed there was a crack in the roof, the glass roof. So immediately I just jumped on the seat and went headfirst through the roof, got my head all blood streaming everywhere, and I just jumped, hit the deck, rolled over, and I was surrounded by screaming, flames, black smoke, and somebody shouting, "Clear the train, it's gonna blow."
Still inside the battered dome car, Zora Olson regains consciousness.
Looked out and saw this hole in the side of the car, and I thought, I better get out of here. I jumped up, and then I found out I couldn't get up. I mean, I was up, but I couldn't stay up. My foot was gone, or my leg was gone, rather. My other foot was all mashed up too. I didn't feel any pain at the first, I guess. I was just numb, I don't know. So I just fell back, and somebody came and lifted me out on the ground.
Outside the overturned dome car, Martin Peterson realizes there is still someone inside.
He could see people who were hurt and wondered if he could help get them out. So he climbed back up into the car. Mrs. Olson, her sister, was laying on the floor. And so Martin went to see if she was alive, put his fingers in her neck, and there was no pulse.
While he is unable to save Isabel Ross, Peterson is able to lead another woman passenger to safety. At the end of the train, conductor Wayne Smith frantically radios Central Control for help. His caboose and 40 cars, some containing flammable chemicals, have stopped short of the collision point and remain on the track. So have the last 2 passenger cars picked up in Jasper just hours before, protected by the diesel unit between them and the front of the train. Stunned passengers can't believe the horrific scene spread out on the tracks in front of them.
You're looking at a pile that is at least 10 meters deep, 500 meters long, and probably up to 100 meters across.
The front ends of the locomotives would have become instant death traps. The various pieces of rolling stock scattered left and right, as though some giant had simply kicked the 2 trains.
Oh, Valley of Death, oh, terrible. The screams were still going on, the smoke and the flames.
Saturday morning, February 8th, 1986. In the town of Hinton, Alberta, the General Hospital gets an emergency call. There has been a train accident 25 kilometers to the east. Immediately, the town's emergency services go into action, all heading for the cloud of smoke that billows on the horizon. Nothing in their training can prepare them for what they see. Victims still trapped in the dining car are burning alive, and rescuers can do nothing but watch. Volunteer firefighters from Hinton and the local pulp mill have most of the fires under control within a half hour. The most seriously injured passengers are airlifted by helicopter to Edmonton, including 78-year-old Zora Olson. Zora is so battered and bruised, she is barely recognizable to her daughter, who can only identify her by her rings. 16 passengers and 7 crew are killed in the crash near Hinton that February morning. Friends and relatives of the dead are left to wonder why the accident happened in the first place. The government launches a royal commission to answer that question.
Mr. Justice Foisey sat as a single commissioner. He called 150 witnesses. These involved passengers, signalmen, officials of the railway, surviving crew members of both trains.
Conductor Wayne Smith testifies that he did not pull the emergency brake because he thought the freight train was under control. He tells of being unable to reach the front-end crew by radio and believes they may have been asleep at the time of the accident. Fatigue and railway crew scheduling become main issues in the commission investigation.
As part of my investigation, I looked at some 75 train crew schedules, and I found some people working 20 hours. People kept reporting very short periods of sleep, typically 4, 5, 6 hours, and they would say that they had adequate sleep, but that of course is not adequate sleep. Adequate sleep is 7.5 to 8 hours. In the case of the engineer who was at fault in the Hinton collision, he had, at the very most, 3.5 hours of sleep.
In December of 1986, the Foisey Commission releases its findings. It cites the failure of the freight crew to give the passenger train the right of way as the cause of the accident, but also places blame on the railway company.
Justice Foisey, I think, did a marvelous job of deciding who was to blame. He wrote a great deal about the responsibility of CN management, and he saw this as a system issue. It wasn't just one person falling asleep at one point in time and that person should be blamed. It was much larger than that.
Commission recommendations result in some changes to crew schedules. limiting shifts to 12 hours with at least 8 hours off in between. These changes are small consolation for Martin Peterson, who must deal with the physical and emotional consequences of the Hinton crash.
I feel it was the beginning of his decline in health. He kept getting all sorts of disturbing things happen, sicknesses, and he didn't seem to recover quick. The big thing that he kept saying to me was, it brought back all the war. It brought back all the war memories.
Zora Olson, on the other hand, learns to walk again, despite the loss of a leg and part of the other foot.
Every so often I have those phantom pains. Sounds as if they don't. It's only your imagination, but it isn't. They really hurt. You can swear it's right down at your ankle. That's where the pains are.
The greatest pain for Zora, however, is the loss of her sister Isabel.
I didn't worry about my sister until a few days afterwards. It didn't sink in really that she was really gone. I just hadn't realized what had happened.
I've got a scrapbook. I get it out maybe a couple of times a year and have a glance through it, but I'm sure that anybody who was involved in the crash would never forget it. Every minute counts. Well, every minute counts anyway, doesn't it? You know what I mean? Whether you have a train crash or not. You want to enjoy life, and that's what it's all about.